The final confrontation came a week later. It was initiated as I expected by them, but with a new, desperate flourish. I received a certified letter, a relic from an older, more serious time. It was from a law firm, a small local practice I'd never heard of. The letter was full of puffed-up legal jargon, talking about potential malfeasance, breach of fiduciary responsibility, and unlawful restriction of access to beneficiary assets. It formally requested a meeting with me, as the family's designated point of contact, and a representative from the wealth management firm. They were trying to call my bluff, to force the hand of the invisible administrator. They wanted to put all the players in one room, believing that the weight of legal authority would crush my mysterious intransigence. I replied via email, not to the lawyer, but to my parents. A meeting is acceptable. My apartment. This Friday at 3 p.m. I will represent the administrator. I knew this was the moment. The final act. I spent the next few days preparing, not with anger or anxiety, but with the calm focus of an engineer designing a flawless system. The system in this case was their demolition. I arranged for my largest monitor, a 65-inch high-resolution screen, to be connected to my personal laptop. I queued up the Shepherd's dashboard. I compiled a few key documents into a single folder on my desktop. The original LLC formation papers for Northwood Asset Management, the initial wire transfer receipt for the $800,000 from my personal bank account, and a detailed year-by-year contribution summary. David called me the night before. "Are you ready for this?" he asked, a rare note of concern in his voice. "I've been ready for 10 years. I just didn't know it." I told him, "This isn't about revenge, Dave. It's about a system restore. I'm just returning everything to its factory settings." Friday arrived, a gray, overcast day that matched my mood perfectly. At precisely 3 p.m., my intercom buzzed. It was them, plus a man in an ill-fitting suit carrying a worn leather briefcase. Their lawyer. I let them in. This time, I had staged the scene. I was seated in an armchair in my living room, my laptop on the coffee table in front of me, the large monitor on the wall behind me, dark waiting. I gestured for them to sit on the sofa opposite me. They arranged themselves like a firing squad in reverse. My father, grim and rigid, my mother clutching a tissue, Ryan vibrating with a nervous, aggressive energy, and the lawyer, a man named Mr. Peterson, who looked flustered to be in a setting so far removed from his dusty office. Mr. Peterson cleared his throat and opened his briefcase. "Mr. Miller," he began, formally addressing me, "we are here today on behalf of your parents, Mark and Carol Miller, the designated beneficiaries of the Northwood Asset Management Fund. We have reason to believe that the fund's administrator has acted in a manner inconsistent with their fiduciary duties by arbitrarily restricting access to our clients' rightful assets. We are prepared to seek a court order to compel a full accounting and release of all funds." He spoke with a practiced, hollow authority. I let him finish his entire speech without interruption. I just nodded slowly, my eyes on his. When he was done, a heavy silence filled the room. "Thank you, Mr. Peterson," I said, my voice calm and even. "That was very thorough. You've raised some serious points about fiduciary duty and the rights of beneficiaries, so let's talk about that." With a tap on my keyboard, the large monitor behind me flickered to life. The sleek, black interface of the Shepherd filled the screen. Graphs, charts, and lines of data glowed in the dim light. I saw my mother flinch. My father leaned forward, squinting. Ryan's eyes widened. "What is this?" my father demanded. "This," I said, turning in my chair to face them fully, "is the Shepherd, or as you call it, the fund, and I am the administrator." The confusion on their faces was a sight to behold. Mr. Peterson looked from me to the screen, his legalistic bluster completely deflating. What do you mean? You're the administrator." "I mean I own Northwood Asset Management, LLC, I said, clicking my mouse. A scanned copy of the LLC formation document appeared on the screen. My name was clearly listed as the sole member. "I hired the wealth management firm you've been trying to call to act as a public face, and most importantly, I am the fund's sole contributor." I clicked again. A bank statement from 10 years ago appeared on the screen. A wire transfer from my personal account, for $800,000. I then brought up the contribution log, a long scrolling list of monthly transfers from my salary, each one a silent testament to my sacrifice. There was no lucky investment, Dad, I said, my voice soft but carrying the force of a battering ram. There was no genius fund manager from your past. There was just me. I saw you were headed for a difficult retirement, and I wanted you to be secure, so I used my own money, the money I made from my own work, to build this for you. It was a gift. I turned my gaze to Ryan, a gift that you, Ryan, have been treating like your personal slush fund for the last 5 years. Every fancy dinner, that ridiculous car, that joke of a company you ran, it was all paid for by me, the brother you looked down on, the failure. The silence that followed my father's bombshell wasn't just an absence of sound, it was a physical presence. It pressed in on me, heavy and cold. I could hear my own heart thudding in my chest, a slow, methodical drumbeat counting down to a war I hadn't even realized I was about to declare. Jeff, are you there? My father's voice crackled, pulling me back from the brink. I'm here, Dad, I said, the words feeling foreign in my own mouth. They were the words of the old Jeff, the accommodating Jeff, the Jeff who would have probably offered to look into it, but the man who spoke them was someone new, someone forged in the crucible of that single, outrageous request. That's a lot of money. It's for your brother, he shot back, his panic twisting into impatience. It's for the family. We have to support him. You know how much this means to him, do I? I thought, a bitter laugh trying to force its way up my throat. I know it means a new sports car, and another year of playing the role of the tech mogul. I know it means more stories at Thanksgiving about his hustle, while my own accomplishments are met with a polite nod. Okay, Dad, I said, my voice eerily flat. I understand. I didn't say I would help. I didn't say I wouldn't. I just ended the call, leaving him in a state of hopeful ambiguity. My apartment, usually a sanctuary of clean lines and quiet order, suddenly felt like a cage. I paced the polished concrete floor, the city lights twinkling below like a galaxy of indifferent stars. $500,000. The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. It wasn't a request, it was a demand, filtered through the emotional blackmail of our parents. They weren't asking for help, they were informing me of a withdrawal. My withdrawal. My mind started to spiral backwards, unspooling years of carefully repressed memories, each one a small cut, a minor wound that had led to this fatal hemorrhage of patience. I was suddenly 8 years old again, standing in our cluttered suburban living room. In my hands, I held a first-place trophy from the district-wide science fair. It was a gaudy, gold-colored plastic thing, but to me, it was the Nobel Prize. I had spent months building a miniature maglev train, soldering wires, encoding a simple control board until my fingers were raw. I burst through the door, my chest puffed out, ready to be showered with praise. But the house was in chaos. My mother was on the phone, her voice frantic. My father was in the backyard, his face a thundercloud, and in the center of it all was Ryan, who was 10 at the time, looking not guilty, but defiant. He'd been trying to hit a baseball over the roof, and had instead sent it rocketing through the bay window of our neighbor, Mr. Henderson. My trophy was forgotten. My achievement was a non-event. The entire evening was consumed by Ryan. There were apologies, promises to pay for the damage, and a long drawn-out lecture from my father that somehow ended with him tousling Ryan's hair and saying, "Well, son, at least you've got a powerful swing. We'll work on your aim." Ryan's destructive impulse was reframed as budding athletic talent. My intellectual triumph was wallpaper. I remember putting my little trophy on my nightstand that night, the plastic feeling cheap and hollow in my hands. It was the first time I understood the family's unspoken exchange rate. 1 ounce of Ryan's dramatic flair was worth a pound of my quiet competence. The memories kept coming, each one adding another layer of cold, hard certainty to my resolve. I remembered my college graduation. I was the first person in our family to get an engineering degree, graduating with honors. My parents came, of course. They sat through the ceremony, and we went out for a nice sensible dinner afterwards. They said they were proud. But 2 weeks later, Ryan, who had dropped out of community college after 1 semester to find himself, announced he was starting a t-shirt company. The sheer force of the celebration that followed was staggering. My father broke out a bottle of champagne he'd been saving for a special occasion. My mother cooked an elaborate coq au vin, a dish she reserved for monumental events. They toasted Ryan's entrepreneurial spirit. My degree was a checkbox on a list of parental duties. His half-baked idea was a rocket launch. The most painful memory, the one that truly set the stage for tonight, happened 3 years ago. My parents had been stressed about their mortgage for years. The balloon payment was coming due, and the nest egg they thought they had was smaller than they'd hoped. So for their 35th wedding anniversary, I did something I thought was profound. I took a significant chunk of my savings, real savings, from my actual job, and I paid off the entire remaining balance of their house. I didn't tell them beforehand, I just had the bank send them the paid-in-full notice. I expected tears of joy, relief. What I got was a stilted, awkward phone call. "Jeff, we don't know what to say," my mother said, her voice sounding more confused than grateful. "That's a very generous thing to do." My father was even worse. "We could have handled it, son," he said, a strange edge of pride in his voice, as if my help was an indictment of his own ability. They were grateful, I suppose, but it was the kind of gratitude you show a helpful stranger, not your own son. It felt transactional. A week later, the house was alive with music and laughter. I wasn't invited to this party. I found out about it from a photo my aunt posted online. The caption read, "Celebrating Ryan's huge success. So proud of my nephew for landing his first round of major seed funding." The seed funding, of course, was just the first massive 5-figure allowance they had given him from the shepherd. My gift to them, freedom from debt, security in their own home, was a quiet, private affair. His act of taking my money from them was cause for a public spectacle. They celebrated him for accepting the gift I gave. The logic was so twisted, so fundamentally broken, that it made my head spin. I had paid for the stage upon which my brother was being lauded for a play he hadn't even written. That night, after seeing the party photos, I called my best and only real friend, David. David and I met in college. He was a finance major, a sharp, no-nonsense guy who viewed the world through the clear lens of a balance sheet. He was the only person on earth who knew the truth about the shepherd, not the emotional part, not the family drama, but the mechanics of it. He had helped me structure the trust and choose the low-profile wealth management firm to act as a front. I remember my voice shaking as I told him about the party. He was silent for a long moment. Then he said, in his typical blunt fashion, "Jeff, what you've built for them is a safety net, a brilliant one, but they're not using it as a net. They're using it as a trampoline for your brother, and you're the one jumping up and down underneath to keep him in the air. This isn't sustainable." "It's for my parents, David," I'd argued, trying to convince myself as much as him, "so they don't have to worry." "Are they not worried?" he'd countered. "It sounds to me like they're worried sick about Ryan." "You haven't eliminated worry, Jeff. You've just rerouted it. You've become the invisible, uncredited god of their financial world, and they're sacrificing your money at the altar of their favorite son. It's a bad investment." His words had stung then, but tonight, they echoed in my mind with the clarity of a prophet's warning. He was right. It was a bad investment, not financially. The shepherd's algorithm was a thing of beauty, consistently outperforming the market. It was a bad emotional investment. I had poured my resources, my care, and my silent sacrifice into a system that yielded only pain for me and undeserved glory for my brother. I walked over to my desk and powered on my secondary monitor. With a few keystrokes, I pulled up the administrative dashboard for the shepherd. The interface was sleek and black, lines of code and performance graphs glowing in the dark room. I could see the fund's total value, the asset allocation, the performance history, and I could see the withdrawal log. There it was, a neat, orderly list of debits, all transferred to my parents' primary checking account. $20,000, $30,000, $25,000, a steady, relentless bleed. And then I saw the pending request log. My father hadn't waited. He'd already tried to initiate the transfer. A bright red line of text screamed at me from the screen. Withdraw our request. $500,000. Pending administrative approval. They really thought it was that easy. They thought they could just walk up to the magic money tree, shake it, and a fortune would fall into their laps. A cold fury, clean and pure, washed over me. The years of resentment, the thousands of small slights, the crushing weight of being the responsible, invisible son. It all coalesced into a single, unshakable point of resolve. I thought of David's other piece of advice from that long ago phone call. You built them a golden lifeboat, Jeff, he had said, and they're using it to bail out a sinking cruise ship with your brother at the helm. When do you stop handing them buckets? The answer was now. I wasn't just going to stop handing them buckets. I was going to pull the plug on the lifeboat. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. My father's pleading voice, my mother's disappointed sighs, Ryan's arrogant confidence. It all faded into white noise. This wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about respect. It was about a decade of being treated like a utility, a resource to be tapped, instead of a son to be loved. Their love was conditional, and the condition was my silence and my wallet. It wasn't about revenge, not yet. But as my finger descended on the Danny button, a grim thought echoed in my head. It would be. The decision to create the shepherd wasn't born from a single moment of inspiration, but from a slow dawning dread that had been building for years. It started about a decade ago. I was in my mid-20s, fresh off the sale of my first significant piece of software, a data compression algorithm that was elegant, efficient, and most importantly, highly marketable. The payout was life-changing. It wasn't buy an island money, but it was never worry about a mortgage again money. It was the kind of financial security my parents had always talked about, but had never managed to achieve. They were terrible with money, not maliciously so, but with a kind of innocent, wide-eyed incompetence that was almost more dangerous. My father, Mark, was a history teacher, a good man, with a passion for the past, but zero grasp of future financial planning. His idea of a long-term investment was buying a first edition book and hoping it appreciated. My mother, Carol, was even more cavalier. She believed that if you had money in your account, it was meant to be spent. They were constantly chasing small frivolous comforts, a new set of patio furniture, a weekend trip they couldn't afford, always with the vague, optimistic belief that things would just work out. Their retirement plan consisted of a modest 401k from my dad's teaching job and a hazy notion of downsizing someday. I saw the writing on the wall. They were headed for a future of financial stress, one where they'd be forced to rely on their children. And I knew, with the certainty of a physical law, who they would turn to first. Not me, the responsible planner. They would bleed Ryan dry, and when he inevitably had nothing to give, they would turn to me, not for help, but for a bailout of them both. I couldn't just hand them a check. That wasn't the answer. First, their pride would never allow them to accept it gracefully. It would forever change our dynamic, casting me as the parent and them as the dependents. Second, and more practically, any lump sum I gave them would be siphoned off by Ryan within a year. He was a black hole for cash, always had been. From a young age, his allowance was gone in a day. He was always borrowing money from friends, always had a story about a can't-miss opportunity that just needed a little seed money. Giving my parents a fortune would be like handing a bucket of water to a man standing next to a sieve, so I devised a different solution. A solution that only a software engineer with a deep-seated desire for control and a complex family dynamic could invent. I decided to build them a wall, but a wall they would never see, a fortress to protect them from their own worst impulses, disguised as a garden. This was the genesis of the shepherd. The name came to me late one night, while I was sketching out the initial framework. I wasn't just managing money. I was guiding a flock, protecting it from wolves, both external and in Ryan's case, internal. The core of the shepherd was an investment algorithm I wrote from scratch. It was my masterpiece. It wasn't a day trading bot. It was far more sophisticated. It analyzed market trends, yes, but it also incorporated macroeconomic indicators, geopolitical risk factors, and even sentiment analysis scraped from financial news. Its prime directive was not aggressive growth, but radical stability. It was designed to grow steadily, reliably, and to protect its principal asset base above all else. It was, in its own way, a reflection of me, cautious, dependable, and quietly effective. Getting it set up was the tricky part. This is where my friend David became indispensable. He had just started his career at a boutique financial services firm, and he understood the labyrinthine world of trusts, LLCs, and anonymous beneficiary accounts. Together we devised a plan. I formed a single-member LLC, a ghost corporation with a generic name, something like Northwood Asset Management. This LLC would be the official owner of the investment account. Then, we hired a very discreet, very expensive wealth management firm in a different state to act as the public-facing manager. They knew me only as the representative of Northwood. My parents knew them only as the firm that handles Dad's old fund. I seeded the account with the initial $800,000 from my patent sale, a massive sum. I then set up an automatic transfer from my own salary, a silent, monthly tribute that further fed the beast. The final piece of the puzzle was the access structure. I designated my parents as the sole beneficiaries, with the right to request withdrawals, but I designated my LLC, and by extension, me, as the sole administrator. I had the keys to the kingdom. I could set withdrawal limits, approve or deny transfers, and most importantly, I was the only one who could see the full picture, the contributions, the total value, and the transaction history. My parents just got a simplified monthly statement that showed their balance and the performance of their fund. They believed their old financial advisor had been a secret genius. They never once questioned it. It was the perfect crime of compassion. For the first few years, it worked exactly as I'd intended. They drew a modest amount each month, a supplement to my father's pension. It paid for groceries, a new roof, a trip to see their grandchildren. It gave them a sense of security they'd never had. I felt a quiet pride watching the algorithm work, seeing their small corner of the world made safer by my hidden efforts. Then Ryan's t-shirt company failed, and his import-export business, and his social media consulting firm. Each failure was followed by a period of dramatic despair, which was in turn followed by a brand new, even more brilliant idea. And each new idea required seed money. At first my parents resisted, but Ryan was persistent. He was a master of emotional manipulation, weaving tales of being on the cusp of a breakthrough, of needing just one more push to achieve the success he and they so desperately craved. The first big withdrawal for Ryan was a shock to my system. I saw the $20,000 request pop up on the Shepherd's dashboard. My first instinct was to deny it, but then I hesitated. If I did, my parents would call the firm. The firm would contact me, and the whole charade could unravel. I would be forced to explain why their fund manager was refusing to give them their own money. So with a heavy heart, I clicked approve. It was the beginning of the end. That first withdrawal was a dam break. The requests became more frequent, the amounts larger. Ryan's lifestyle inflated to match his new income stream. He leased the fancy car. He moved into the penthouse. He started talking about his company, a nebulous tech startup called Innovate, which as far as I could tell, had no product, no employees besides himself, and no purpose other than to consume cash. I brought my concerns to David. We met at a quiet bar downtown, the kind with dark wood and low lighting. I laid it all out for him, showing him the burn rate on my tablet. The graph was terrifying, a steep, upward climbing line of depletion. David swirled the ice in his whiskey, his brow furrowed. "Jeff, he's not just spending the interest anymore, he's eating the principal. At this rate, the entire fund you built will be gone in 3 years, maybe less. What do I do?" I asked. The question raw and exposed. If I cut it off, they'll know something's up. They'll question everything. "Let them," David said, his gaze sharp. "What you've done here is frankly it's insane, but it's also noble. You tried to give them a perfect retirement, but you can't protect people from themselves. Your brother is a parasite, and your parents are the willing hosts. You're just the blood bank. You have to decide when you're no longer willing to make donations." He then pointed to a feature on the Shepherd's dashboard. "I'd built but never used the administrator controls. You don't have to turn it off completely," he said, tapping the screen. "You have more subtle tools at your disposal. Look, you can set a monthly withdrawal limit. You can require a 72-hour hold On all transfers over a certain amount, you can change the contact information for administrative queries to a new email address that only you monitor. You're the architect of this system, Jeff. They're just living in it. You can remodel the house whenever you want. His words were a revelation. I had been thinking in binary terms, on or off. David showed me the dimmer switch. I didn't have to blow up the whole thing. I could just constrain it. I could reassert the control that I had abdicated out of a misguided sense of filial duty. That conversation was 6 months ago. I had been wrestling with the decision ever since, putting it off, telling myself it wasn't that bad, that it would level out. But Ryan's request for $500,000 had changed the equation completely. This wasn't remodeling the house anymore. This was a demolition order. Sitting in my apartment, the red light of the pending request blinking on my monitor, I finally understood. The shepherd wasn't a fortress to protect my parents. It had become my brother's private treasury, and I was its unwilling chancellor. The plan was no longer about subtlety. The plan was about a reckoning. My secret, which I had created out of love and a desire for their security, had become my leverage, and I was finally ready to use it. The hidden world I had built was about to become very, very real for them. The first move in a silent war is the most important. It's not a cannon blast. It's a quiet click, a change in a single line of code, an action so subtle, it goes unnoticed, until its consequences ripple outwards. After denying the $500,000 transfer, I didn't call my father back. I didn't text my mother. I let the silence hang in the air, a weapon in its own right. They would be expecting a call, an explanation, a solution. I gave them nothing. My first concrete action was surgical. I logged back into the shepherd's administrative panel. My hands were steady, my mind a placid lake of cold resolve. I navigated to the user settings for my parents' beneficiary account. With a few clicks, I made 3 critical changes. First, I implemented a maximum monthly withdrawal limit of $5,000. It was a significant sum for any normal retiree, but a pittance compared to the tens of thousands Ryan had been burning through. It was enough to live, but not enough to fund a fantasy. Second, I instituted a mandatory 5 business day review period for any withdrawal request over $1,000. The instantaneous transfers they had grown accustomed to were a thing of the past. From now on, every request would be a conscious, deliberate choice on my part. Third, and most crucially, I changed the administrator contact protocol. The wealth management firm had a generic email and a phone number that would eventually route to me. After 3 layers of corporate bureaucracy, I deleted that. The new contact method for any and all account queries was a brand new encrypted email address, an email address that fed directly to my phone, and mine alone. I had just cut the firm out of the loop. There was no one left for my parents to call. There was only the administrator. There was only me. I saved the changes and logged out. The whole operation took less than 2 minutes, and then I waited. It took 48 hours for the first tremor to hit. It was a text from my mother. "Hi Jeff, hope you're well. Your father tried to make a small transfer from the fund to pay for Ryan's car lease, and it didn't go through. Something about new limits. Very strange. Could you maybe give the firm a call for us? They're not answering their old number." I read the text and felt a flicker of something, not pleasure, exactly, vindicative satisfaction. "Sorry to hear that," I texted back. "I'm swamped at work right now. I'm sure it's just a technical issue that will resolve itself." The lie was effortless. For years, I had been their technical support for everything from a malfunctioning printer to a confusing TV remote. The role of the helpful, tech-savvy son was one I could play in my sleep. But now, I was using that very role as a shield. The next day the panic began to set in. A voicemail from my father, his voice strained. "Jeff, it's not a technical issue. I got an email back from some new address. It just said the withdrawal was denied for exceeding monthly limits." "What limits? There have never been limits. I need you to get to the bottom of this. Ryan needs that money. The leasing company is calling him." I deleted the voicemail without a reply. A few hours later, an email landed in my inbox. It was from Ryan. The subject line was an arrogant, one-word command. "Fund, Jeff," the email began, dripping with the condescending tone of a man who believes he's addressing an inferior. "There seems to be a major glitch with Mom and Dad's retirement account. I've had my assistant try to get through to the fund managers all day, and they're unreachable. Since you're the computer guy, I need you to figure out what's going on. This is holding up my Q4 operational budget. It's critical. His Q4 operational budget. The sheer, unadulterated gall of it. He had so fully integrated my secret gift into his worldview that he had started using corporate jargon to describe his allowance. I typed out a one-sentence reply. I'm not a representative of the fund, Ryan. I can't help you. The response was almost instantaneous. Don't be useless, Jeff. Mom and Dad are counting on you to fix this. It's their money. Just make the call. I didn't bother to reply to that one. I didn't need to. The beauty of my position was that their panic was directly proportional to my silence. The less I did, the more they unraveled. The first of the month arrived, a day that had once been a source of quiet pain for me. It was the day Ryan's allowance always hit my parents' account. This time, however, would be different. I received an automated notification from the shepherd. Withdrawal request. $25,000. A new request, a bit more than his usual, probably to cover the late fees on his car. I let the request sit there for a full 24 hours. Then I logged in, denied it, and immediately initiated a new transfer myself. Amount $500. The message had to be unmistakable. It wasn't a glitch. It wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. The explosion was immediate. My phone began to vibrate incessantly, a ceaseless barrage of calls and texts. My mother, crying, leaving rambling voicemails about how they were going to lose everything. My father, furious, demanding I call him back this instant. And Ryan's messages were a masterclass in escalating desperation. First came the arrogance. Is this a joke, Jeff? $500. Fix it, now. Then the bargaining. Look, if this is about that $500,000, I get it. It was a big ask. But my operational costs are real. We can talk about a smaller amount. Just turn the account back on. Then the veiled threats. I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but you're messing with Mom and Dad's financial security. This could have legal consequences, you know. Fiduciary duty. I laughed out loud at that one. Fiduciary duty. He was throwing around legal terms he'd probably heard in a movie, with no understanding of what they meant. He had no idea he was threatening the very person whose money he was trying to secure. The real-world consequences of my silent takeover began to mount, and I watched it all from the detached, digital omniscience of my dashboard. Ryan's penthouse apartment had a feature where residents could pay their rent directly through an online portal. I saw the charge attempt from his property management company appear in the log. Request $12,000. Denied. Insufficient funds. A week later, I got a call from my aunt, my mother's sister. Jeff, your mother is a wreck, she said, her voice dripping with concerned trolling. She said Ryan is having some trouble, that he might be getting evicted. Is everything okay with you all? The family gossip mill had started churning. The facade of the brilliant, successful son was beginning to crack, and they were all turning to the one person they had always ignored for answers. I'm fine, Aunt Sarah, I said calmly. You'd have to talk to Ryan about his situation. The final act of his financial implosion was the car, a gleaming, silver sports car that he paraded around as a symbol of his success. I knew from my parents that the lease was exorbitant. 2 days after the rent payment failed, I saw another charge hit the log. Request, $2,500 from Prestige Auto Leasing. Denied. Insufficient funds. 2 weeks later, David sent me a link to a photo on social media. It was posted by one of Ryan's superficial friends. The photo showed Ryan's car being loaded onto a tow truck, with the caption, "Ouch, repo man strikes. #hustle culture, #fail. Seeing that picture, I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel a thrill of schadenfreude. I felt a profound, chilling sense of peace. It was the feeling of a fever finally breaking. The infection of my family's entitlement, which had raged for years, was being purged by the simple antibiotic of reality. The silent takeover was complete. The money was gone. The power was gone. All that was left for them was the truth, and I knew with absolute certainty they would not be able to handle it. The family's exodus from the land of make-believe was faster and more brutal than I could have imagined. Without the constant intravenous drip of my money, the fragile ecosystem of their lives collapsed. It started with Ryan, of course. The eviction notice wasn't a threat, it was a reality. He had to pack up his designer clothes and expensive gadgets from the penthouse and move back into his childhood bedroom in my parents' house. The room was still adorned with his old baseball trophies and posters of rock bands from 20 years ago. The irony was poetic. The great disruptor, the visionary founder, was brought low by a simple failure to pay rent, forced to retreat into the past he'd tried so hard to escape. My parents' lives began to fray at the edges too. They had grown accustomed to a lifestyle subsidized by the shepherd, and the weekly dinners at fancy restaurants, my mother's shopping trips, my father's golf club membership, all of it was predicated on a budget that no longer existed. Their world shrank with their bank account. The grand, sprawling suburban house, once a symbol of their success, began to feel cavernous and mocking. Its upkeep alone, without the fund to dip into, was a strain on my father's meager pension. The phone calls continued, but their tone shifted. The anger and demands gave way to a desperate, wheedling manipulation. It was my mother who became the primary agent of this new campaign. She would call me, her voice thick with manufactured tears, a performance worthy of an Oscar. "Jeff, I don't understand why you're doing this to us," she'd sob. "Your brother is so depressed. He won't even come out of his room. He had a dream, and you've crushed it. For what? What did we ever do to you? What did you do to me?" The question was so profoundly clueless, so breathtakingly devoid of self-awareness, that it left me speechless. She was asking me to list a decade's worth of slights, 1,000 instances of being made to feel second best, of being treated as a walking, talking ATM. I refused to play her game. "Mom, I have nothing to do with Ryan's finances," I'd say, my voice a monotone wall she couldn't scale. "And I have no control over your retirement account. You need to contact the administrator." "But we have," she'd wail. "We send emails to that address, and we get nothing back but cold, one-sentence replies. It's like talking to a robot." "You have no idea," I'd think. Then came the escalation. They showed up at my apartment building one Saturday morning, unannounced. I saw them on the intercom camera. My mother, my father, and Ryan, a sullen thundercloud of a man, standing behind them. They looked like a sad, defeated delegation coming to sue for peace. I buzzed them in. I had decided that this confrontation was inevitable, and it was better to have it on my turf, in my space, where I held the home field advantage. They stepped into my apartment and looked around, their expressions a mixture of awe and disdain. My space is ordered, modern, and uncluttered. It's the physical manifestation of my mind. To them, it must have looked sterile and cold, lacking the cluttered, performative warmth of their own home. My father was the first to speak, attempting to reclaim his patriarchal authority. "Jeff, this has gone on long enough," he said, his voice trying for stern but landing on shaky. "We need to talk about what's happening with the fund." "There's nothing to talk about, Dad," I replied, remaining standing while they hovered awkwardly in the entryway. "It's not my fund." Ryan, who had been silent until now, finally exploded. "Stop lying," he snarled, his face red with blotchy anger. "You did something. Ever since you found out about the $500,000, the account has been frozen. This is your fault. You're punishing me for being more successful than you." The accusation hung in the air, so ludicrous, so completely inverted from reality, that I almost laughed. Him, more successful than me? He was a 35-year-old man living in his parents' house, his fake company exposed as a shell, his entire lifestyle revealed as a fraud funded by the very person he was insulting. "Ryan, your success was a mirage," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "You built a sandcastle on the beach, and you're angry at me because the tide came in." My mother rushed forward, putting a hand on my arm. It was the classic guilt trip maneuver. "Jeff, please," she begged, her eyes wide and pleading. "Don't do this to your brother. He's family. Whatever you're angry about, we can fix it. Just make the money come back. We'll be more careful. Ryan has learned his lesson." It was the final, clarifying moment. Even now, even in their desperation, they didn't get it. They thought this was a tantrum. They thought I was a child withholding a toy, and that with the right combination of scolding and pleading, I would give it back. They still believed the money was theirs. They still believed I was just the help. They saw me not as the source, but as the obstacle. I looked at their faces, my father's desperate anger, my mother's theatrical sorrow, my brother's petulant rage, and I felt nothing but a vast, empty distance. The love I had once felt for them, the sense of duty, had been eroded away, grain by grain, by years of neglect and entitlement. The power had shifted completely. For my entire life, they had held all the emotional power, dispensing their approval like currency, leaving me in a perpetual deficit. But now, the real currency was mine, and by withholding it, I had revealed the bankruptcy of their affection. "There's nothing I can do," I said, the lie tasting like freedom on my tongue. "I think it's time for you all to leave." I walked to the door and held it open. They stared at me, dumbfounded. They had come expecting a negotiation, a surrender. They were met with an eviction. For the first time in my life, I was the one setting the terms, and the terms were unconditional. They left without another word. The sound of the door closing behind them, the sweetest sound I had ever heard. I knew this wasn't the end. This was just the prelude to the final, unavoidable confrontation, and for the first time, I was looking forward to it. The final confrontation came a week later. It was initiated as I expected by them, but with a new desperate flourish. I received a certified letter, a relic from an older, more serious time. It was from a law firm, a small local practice I'd never heard of. The letter was full of puffed-up legal jargon, talking about potential malfeasance, breach of fiduciary responsibility, and unlawful restriction of access to beneficiary assets. It formally requested a meeting with me, as the family's designated point of contact, and a representative from the wealth management firm. They were trying to call my bluff, to force the hand of the invisible administrator. They wanted to put all the players in one room, believing that the weight of legal authority would crush my mysterious intransigence. I replied via email, not to the lawyer, but to my parents. "A meeting is acceptable. My apartment, this Friday at 3 p.m. I will represent the administrator." I knew this was the moment, the final act. I spent the next few days preparing, not with anger or anxiety, but with the calm focus of an engineer designing a flawless system. The system in this case was their demolition. I arranged for my largest monitor, a 65-inch high-resolution screen, to be connected to my personal laptop. I queued up the Shepherd's dashboard. I compiled a few key documents into a single folder on my desktop. The original LLC formation papers for Northwood Asset Management, the initial wire transfer receipt for the $800,000 from my personal bank account, and a detailed year-by-year contribution summary. David called me the night before. "Are you ready for this?" he asked, a rare note of concern in his voice. "I've been ready for 10 years. I just didn't know it." I told him, "This isn't about revenge, Dave. It's about a system restore. I'm just returning everything to its factory settings." Friday arrived, a gray, overcast day that matched my mood perfectly. At precisely 3 p.m., my intercom buzzed. It was them, plus a man in an ill-fitting suit carrying a worn leather briefcase. Their lawyer. I let them in. This time, I had staged the scene. I was seated in an armchair in my living room, my laptop on the coffee table in front of me, the large monitor on the wall behind me, dark waiting. I gestured for them to sit on the sofa opposite me. They arranged themselves like a firing squad in reverse. My father, grim and rigid, my mother clutching a tissue, Ryan vibrating with a nervous, aggressive energy, and the lawyer, a man named Mr. Peterson, who looked flustered to be in a setting so far removed from his dusty office. Mr. Peterson cleared his throat and opened his briefcase. "Mr. Miller," he began, formally addressing me, "we are here today on behalf of your parents, Mark and Carol Miller, the designated beneficiaries of the Northwood Asset Management Fund. We have reason to believe that the fund's administrator has acted in a manner inconsistent with their fiduciary duties by arbitrarily restricting access to our clients' rightful assets. We are prepared to seek a court order to compel a full accounting and release of all funds." He spoke with a practiced hollow authority, I let him finish his entire speech without interruption. I just nodded slowly, my eyes on his. When he was done, a heavy silence filled the room. "Thank you, Mr. Peterson," I said, my voice calm and even. "That was very thorough. You've raised some serious points about fiduciary duty and the rights of beneficiaries, so let's talk about that." With a tap on my keyboard, the large monitor behind me flickered to life. The sleek black interface of the Shepherd filled the screen. Graphs, charts, and lines of data glowed in the dim light. I saw my mother flinch. My father leaned forward, squinting. Ryan's eyes widened. "What is this?" my father demanded. "This," I said, turning in my chair to face them fully, "is the Shepherd, or as you call it, the fund, and I am the administrator." The confusion on their faces was a sight to behold. Mr. Peterson looked from me to the screen, his legalistic bluster completely deflating. What? What do you mean? You're the administrator." "I mean I own Northwood Asset Management, LLC, I said, clicking my mouse. A scanned copy of the LLC formation document appeared on the screen. My name was clearly listed as the sole member. "I hired the wealth management firm you've been trying to call to act as a public face, and most importantly, I am the fund's sole contributor." I clicked again. A bank statement from 10 years ago appeared on the screen. A wire transfer from my personal account for $800,000. I then brought up the contribution log, a long scrolling list of monthly transfers from my salary, each one a silent testament to my sacrifice. "There was no lucky investment, Dad," I said, my voice soft but carrying the force of a battering ram. "There was no genius fund manager from your past. There was just me. I saw you were headed for a difficult retirement, and I wanted you to be secure, so I used my own money, the money I made from my own work, to build this for you. It was a gift." I turned my gaze to Ryan. "A gift that you, Ryan, have been treating like your personal slush fund for the last 5 years. Every fancy dinner, that ridiculous car, that joke of a company you ran, it was all paid for by me, the brother you looked down on, the failure." The room was utterly silent. The only sound was the faint hum of my computer. The truth had landed not like a bomb but like a vacuum, sucking all the air and noise out of the room. My mother's face was ashen, the tissue falling from her hand. My father stared at the screen, his mouth slightly agape, looking like a man who had just seen the ghost of his own profound foolishness. Mr. Peterson was slowly, quietly packing his briefcase, recognizing a family implosion that had absolutely no legal remedy. Ryan was the one who broke the silence, but it wasn't with anger. It was a choked, desperate whisper. "No, that's not possible. It's not only possible, Ryan, it's what happened," I said, standing up. "It was never your money, it was never even their money, it was mine, a gift given freely. But a gift can be taken back, especially when it's being abused." I looked at my parents, at their shattered expressions. There was no triumph in me, only a deep, aching sadness for what they had broken. "The fund is being dissolved," I said, the words falling like stones into a deep well. "The remaining capital is being transferred back to me. The Shepherd is offline, permanently. The monthly deposits to your account will stop. The gravy train has reached its final station." I looked at my father. "You told me I was too safe, that I just calculated trajectories while Ryan shot for the stars. Well, you were right. I did calculate the trajectory. And this right here is the point of impact." They had nothing to say. There was nothing left to say. The foundation of their world, their pride, their family hierarchy, had been built on a lie they had told themselves, a lie I had silently enabled. And with a few clicks of a mouse, I had demolished it, leaving them in the rubble. They stood up, defeated and small, and walked out of my apartment and out of my life. The new reality had begun. In the months that followed the confrontation, a strange and unfamiliar quiet settled over my life. The absence of their drama was a tangible thing, like the silence after a noisy engine finally cuts out. There were no more panicked calls, no more guilt-laden texts, no more emails from Ryan demanding his operational budget. I had blocked their numbers, set up filters to send their emails directly to the trash. It wasn't an act of anger, but of self-preservation. I needed to detoxify. David, My ever-practical friend helped me with the final steps. We dissolved the LLC and transferred the remaining capital from the Shepherd into a new set of personal investment accounts, under my name and my name alone. Looking at the final balance, I was shocked to see how much Ryan had actually burned through. He had vaporized nearly 40% of the principal I had so carefully built. It was a staggering monument to his own ego. News of the fallout trickled back to me through the family grapevine, mostly via my well-meaning but gossipy aunt. Ryan's startup, Innovate, folded overnight. Of course it did. It had no product, no customers, no revenue. It was a brand name attached to a bank account. He was forced to get a real job, something he hadn't had in over a decade. He was working, my aunt told me, as a shift manager at a big box electronics store, a job he had once mocked as being for drones. I felt a flicker of something, not pity, but a kind of cosmic balance being restored. He was finally learning the value of an honest day's work, a lesson I had paid dearly to teach him. My parents faced their own reckoning. Without the endless subsidy, they couldn't afford their large suburban house. They sold it and downsized to a small condominium in a retirement community an hour away. My aunt said my mother was devastated, not by the loss of the space, but by the loss of status. The house had been her stage, the backdrop for her performance as the matriarch of a successful family. Now, the stage was gone. They tried to re-establish contact a few times. A letter arrived, handwritten by my mother. I almost threw it away, but curiosity got the better of me. It wasn't an apology, it was a masterwork of passive-aggressive blame-shifting. It was full of phrases like, "We're still struggling to understand your anger, and I hope one day you can find it in your heart to forgive us for whatever you think we did," and the absolute masterpiece. "Your father and I only ever wanted what was best for both our sons." It was clear they still didn't get it. They never would. They weren't sorry for what they did. They were sorry for the consequences. They were sorry the magic money tree had been chopped down. I tore the letter up and threw it away. My life, on the other hand, began to expand. With the psychic and financial weight of my family lifted, I felt lighter. I took the money I had reclaimed and started a small consulting firm of my own, leveraging my expertise to help genuine startups, companies with real products and real potential, optimize their systems. I was good at it. I traveled. I reconnected with old friends. I started dating someone, a woman named Sarah, who is an architect, someone who builds real things in the real world. When I told her a sanitized version of my story, she didn't look at me with pity. She looked at me with respect. "You built a system to protect them," she said. "It's not your fault they didn't read the user manual." And now, I'm here talking to you. I've asked myself 1,000 times if I did the right thing. Was it too cruel? Did I go too far? Maybe a better son would have sat them down years ago and had an honest conversation. Maybe a kinder man would have just let the money go, writing it off as the cost of keeping a fragile peace. But the peace was a lie. And sometimes, the only way to deal with a lie is to burn it to the ground. It wasn't about revenge. Not really. It was about truth. My family had built their world on a fantasy. The fantasy of Ryan's brilliance and my inadequacy. They loved the roles they had created, and the only way to break the spell was to take away the magic that fueled it. They didn't value me, their son. They valued my resources. So I took the resources away, and I was left with the truth of their feelings. And they were left with the consequences of their choices. What would you have done? Would you have kept funding the fantasy for the sake of family harmony, or would you have pulled the plug too? Let me know what you think in the comments below. I read them all. And if you've ever felt like the overlooked one in your family, if you've ever been the responsible one holding everything together, while someone else gets all the credit, share your story. It helps to know you're not alone. Thank you for listening, and please, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories. It really does help the channel.